Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the first in our 2016 webinar series with David Ackert, Improving Succession and Business Development at the Law Firm. This series is brought to you by the International Lawyers Network, of which your firm is a valued member. The ILN is an association of 91 high-quality, full-service law firms with over 5,000 lawyers in 67 countries on 6 continents. A couple of housekeeping notes. To ask questions, please use the chat box on your screen, and I will ask these of David as we go along. We'll be sharing a PDF of the presentation slides along with the recording following the session. Our next webinar with David takes place on June 30th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time and is on From Handshakes to LinkedIn, Personal Branding That Attracts New Business. We invite you to register with us if you haven't yet done so. Our presenter today and throughout the series is David Ackert. David is the president of the Ackert Advisory and mentor to high-achieving professionals in the legal profession. He has developed and implemented business development programs for countless firms, from AmLaw 100s to local boutiques. Widely recognized as an e-learning pioneer in the legal field, David is the founder of Practice Boomers, a business development e-learning program and 2-time winner of the Legal Marketing Association's Your Honor Awards. He is also the founder of Practice Pipeline, a pipeline management software platform that incorporates business development coaching. The combination of technology and coaching has become a hallmark of his programs. So with that, I'll hand over the microphone to David for his presentation.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. Appreciate being here again and the opportunity to present to your ILN network. So I'll walk through our agenda here, and then we'll take a deeper dive into these topics. But I just want to encourage all of you who are listening in to ask questions on this topic. Succession is one of those things that can be very unique firm to firm, even within a firm. 2 lawyers who are going through the succession process may go through it very differently. So rather than give you a framework with the expectation that that's going to work for your firm as prescribed, I think the way that I would encourage you to think about this is that we are beginning a dialogue around this, hopefully getting the wheels turning in the right direction, and from there you're going to want to navigate this appropriately, because it is a rather sensitive topic and can be a very personal one for the lawyers who are transitioning out, and sometimes for those who are assuming the clientele that will be passed down. So let's talk a little bit about our agenda. We're going to look at the importance of succession, why it can't wait. I'm going to give you some statistics from the marketplace. Then we're going to look at the 3 growth models that firms pursue. There's buying a book, like a lateral move, or buying a firm, absorbing another firm into your firm. There's transition, which is this succession notion, and there's origination, which is business development, bringing new clientele into the firm. Ideally, we're doing all 3, but sometimes there's one that looks more attractive than the other, and a lot of that will depend on some of the things that we cover today. Then we'll look at navigating generational differences within the firm. We're in a unique period of time right now where we have generally 4 different generations working at the firm, all the way from the silent generation, some of the very senior partners, all the way up to the millennials who are our junior associates. And there are some significant differences between those generations, and it's important to be able to build bridges as much as possible so that there are opportunities for better firm culture, but also to pass the mantle in the context of the succession conversation. Then we're going to move into a framework for developing an effective succession plan. Again, this is intended to begin the process for you. It's not going to get you all the way across the finish line, because, of course, there will be some twists and turns that you'll have to navigate as you go through that process. And then finally, shifting unproductive mindsets and ultimately firm culture, and that's specifically around business development. So oftentimes, firms can get locked into a particular way of thinking, either as a group or perhaps certain decision makers within the firm get locked into a particular mindset, and it can be unproductive for the business development process. So we'll touch on that as well. Anyway, all of this to say that we will be looking at the various ways that a firm can pursue growth or at least sustaining itself in the current marketplace. Let's take a look at that marketplace. So this will probably not surprise any of you who have been reading publications within the industry, but you have no doubt observed that the growth trend is flattening. The double-digit, often, growth that law firms were experiencing in decades past has really flattened out. If we look at the growth in demand for law firm services, this is from the latest Thomson Reuters study. It takes a look at growth over the last 8 years or so. And we see that, of course, we were enjoying some bull years over here in '07, and then with the economic downturn, there was a significant dip. Things have evened out pretty much since, perhaps a little too much. In fact, the trend is declining a little, and one could argue that the marketplace is flat. One could even argue that there is a decrease happening year over year. As we take a closer look at some of the nuances there, we can see that there is, over a 10-year trend, a widening gap between the standard rate versus the collected rate. So every year, law firms will raise their rates. They'll send out that letter that says, you know, we want to let you know that we're doing our standard rate raise again this year. And in the past, clients would pretty much follow the firm's lead with their rate increases. But lately, the clients are pushing back. They're saying, you know what, you can raise your rates all you want. We're not going to pay that. And so this gap between what is collected and what is billed, what is collected and what is worked, and certainly what is collected and the standard rate is just getting broader and broader. It's almost like the rate increase is a formality at this point because it doesn't have that much impact on what the firm is actually collecting in terms of revenue. So this puts the firm into a position where it really has to look a little more creatively at how it's going to grow. You can't just raise rates. You can't just do what you've been doing and expect to profit more. So we have really three options. You can buy a book of business by bringing another lawyer into the firm who brings, hopefully, their clients with them. But we all know the problems that are associated with a lateral hire. Oftentimes, the book of business that the lawyer thinks they can bring with them is not the book of business that they bring with them. Statistically, it's usually half of that book, sometimes less. So, you know, oftentimes they think, well, I've got a great relationship with this client, but then when they actually have the conversation and try to sell the client on the new firm, the client says, yeah, you know what, that's a little too much transition for us right now. We're going to stick with where we are. Maybe we can transition some work over to you in time. But of course, in the short term, that ends up hitting the book of business pretty hard for the lawyer that is lateraling in. Also, sometimes there is the issue that the cultural fit isn't quite there and the lawyer doesn't stick around. Sometimes it isn't even about the culture. Sometimes you're looking at a lawyer who every 2 or 3 years is just going to jump from firm to firm because that's their nature and they're hoping to maximize that opportunity. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really benefit the firm who is bringing that lawyer in any kind of long-term way. So then the second option here is transitioning. Now, this is, one would think, mandatory, but it doesn't always happen as elegantly as the firm would like. So this is where your senior rainmakers are starting to age out and you have to transition their clientele to the next generation. Some of that happens organically, but a lot of it doesn't. And we're going to take a deeper look today into some of the challenges that are associated with this and some of the solutions that can be brought to bear to try to get this to happen more effectively because it really can be a very touchy environment to navigate. And then, of course, there's origination. Every firm wants to do this. Many firms are effective at it. But with the flattening landscape, it has become necessary for more and more lawyers to take it on and take it seriously. So there were, of course, the days where you had a few rainmakers and they fed everybody else at the firm, and that model worked just fine. But now that the market has shifted, it becomes necessary for every lawyer to dip their oar in the water and for everyone to row a little bit harder to sustain the same kind of momentum that used to just come to the firm naturally in years past. Now, this creates some problems because not every lawyer at the firm is all that willing or all that excited about the idea of developing business and originating a book of business of their own. Sometimes lawyers, even though they may have the enthusiasm, they just don't have the personality for it. They don't have the skill set for it. So how can firms navigate that a little bit better. We'll have some time to discuss that piece as well. So let's look at the succession piece, since that's the main thrust of today's presentation. If we look at the demographics within the law firm, this came from Heather Morse and Jonathan Fitzgerald, both of whom have done a great deal of research in the field of generational differences at the law firm, and this piece was taken from the New York Times, who published some of their work. So among managing partners at law firms in the AmLaw 100, the annual American Lawyer Survey of Law Firm Rankings showed that only 3% belong to Generation X. And what you are seeing is that the silent generation, this is the oldest generation at the law firm, born 1925 to 1945, so this really is the most senior subset of leadership, still has a significant hold over the leadership of the firm. The leading edge baby boomers have the largest percentage of leadership, and trailing edge baby boomers are just behind them. Generation X, the lawyers in their 40s, these are the generally junior to mid-level partners, have very little voice at the leadership table within the law firm. Now, that might seem natural and well. Obviously, the more time that the lawyer spends in the saddle, the more relationships, the more clients, the more experience they're going to incur. And so this may seem like a healthy split, except that when you consider that what it really means is that senior leadership is not transitioning its client base effectively. It's not transitioning its leadership roles effectively. The older lawyers are not moving into that mentorship role as much. They're still leading the firm. They're still sitting in sort of at the head of the table. And so then the generations behind them have a lot of catching up to do in terms of being able to transition into that leadership role. And if we look at other industries outside of law, we start to see just how off-kilter we are compared to the rest of the corporate world. So over here on the left, we have the AmLaw 100. Again, this material comes from Jonathan Fitzgerald's study. And the leading edge boomers, this is very consistent with the chart that we just saw, are the primary leaders at the firm. However, if you look at every other industry, it's the next generation or even the generation after that who are in the leadership positions. They are the GCs. They are the CEOs who are making the leadership decisions at the firm. Because there's this thing that outside of law called a retirement plan. When somebody starts to approach the age of 65, they start to phase out. They start to phase into their retirement. Now, sure, there may be a few exceptions, but in most law firms, there isn't any kind of a formal retirement plan. You just sort of keep doing what you're doing until the day you die or until the day you decide that you're going to retire. And that can bring about certain conflicts within the firm, especially in the generations that are a little bit younger, who really have earned the right to have some leadership at the firm, but who may not necessarily be experiencing the opportunity for that advancement. And we're going to talk about some of the detrimental repercussions that can occur because of this dynamic. The other thing that's kind of interesting about this chart is you have to look at how they pair up against each other. I mean, let's say you're a law firm, and again, I know we're taking these statistics from the AmLaw 100. Not all of you are AmLaw 100, but consider that the law firm model doesn't change that dramatically from category to category. A lot of these issues prevail whether the firm is small, mid-sized, or large. So here you have, among the AmLaw 100, the leading edge boomers are the leaders, the managing partners at the firm, the senior partners, the partners with all of the influence, all of the control, all the clients. And here they are pitching, let's say, a NASDAQ GC, who is a Gen Xer, which means that the Gen Xer is going to be late 30s, early 40s. You've got a significant generational gap between the person who's selling the services and the person who's buying the services. How effective do you think the rapport building is going to be there? To what extent do you think that the NASDAQ GC is going to say, this law firm's really relevant to me, or this lawyer's really relevant to me, or they really understand my issues? Now, even if the lawyer does understand the issues, there's a little bit of a generational hurdle there as the NASDAQ GC is thinking, boy, this person's my dad's age or maybe even my grandfather's age. So we have to acknowledge that ultimately there needs to be some sort of a blend in the pitching of the services to the client so that the client can experience a relevant person on the other side of the table to their demographic and their perspective on business issues and even personal issues for the rapport building piece. So let's talk a little bit about why succession can be such a challenge at the law firm. Well, first of all, it requires that the successors are recognized and trusted within the firm. Who is going to be the next person on that ladder? Do we even have that person? If we don't recognize that there's someone in the next generation who is going to be able to advance into the managing partner or a senior partner role, or who's going to be able to take on this client who I've been working with for 20, 30 years, if I don't, as a senior partner at my firm, look and see that rising star, then I've already got a pretty serious issue, especially at a smaller firm where no one has really stepped up and shown that leadership potential. Then I'm going to have to hire that person into the firm. That's going to need to be a lateral. That's going to be somebody who is maybe, you know, a junior partner that I can groom into this role. So if you don't already have that person in the role, you've already got a serious succession challenge because there's going to be no one to hand the mantle down to. Then you may find that, well, there's someone who has some potential, but I'm not sure I trust them yet. They haven't developed the expertise. They haven't developed the skill set that is going to be required in order to really handle this client's needs. And of course, that requires a mentorship process that is probably going to need to be a little more intentional than, well, I'll just put them on a few cases and we'll see, you know, if they're able to pick up the ball and run with it. So again, law firms have a tendency not to be as structured around this as they need to be in order to have the outcome that they want. It's also important that the successor, if you will, is identified within the client organization, because you can't take someone who is basically a peer to you, if you're an older lawyer, and just hand them someone who's 20 years younger. It's unlikely that they're going to have the appropriate connection. It's unlikely that the client is going to perceive that younger lawyer as having the same level of expertise or being able to deliver the same quality of services that you've been able to deliver all those years. Again, it may or may not be true, but certainly the perception may be there, and that may guide the client's decision to, maybe it's time we move to another law firm, or maybe we will explore this, but with some considerations in the back of our mind that will make it a lot more difficult for the succession to occur. So a lot of it initially is making sure that the right pieces are on the chessboard so that you can play the game effectively. So the first thing you're going to want to think about is, do I have the successor at the firm? Is this someone that I can groom into this role? And then, do I have the right people within the client organization who I can pair with my successor, with the person who is going to be taking on these clients? Is there a fit here? Second thing we need to do is make sure that there is ample communication. The succession is a challenge because it requires multiple frank conversations with the senior partner and with the client. And a lot of times, law firms tend to be non-confrontational in terms of their culture. They tend to be very congenial. Nobody wants to ruffle the feathers or rock the boat. And usually, if the senior partner whose book of business needs to start to be transitioned isn't the one initiating that conversation, no one else is going to come to them and say, all right, George, it's time for you to think about hanging it up, and so we're going to initiate a succession plan for you. It's a rare firm that's willing to have that conversation with a senior partner because, of course, they don't want to offend that partner. They don't want to, make them feel like they're being pushed out the door. But at the same time, there are some business realities to the fact that some of the senior partners may be getting to an age where it just makes more sense for all concerned that this transition process begins. So unless those frank conversations are occurring, there's going to be a lot of, well, we're just going to sweep this under the rug and hopefully it'll take care of itself, or we're frustrated but we're not willing to address it. A lot of those kinds of issues. Sometimes this, especially at a smaller firm, will happen where the successor is actually related to the senior lawyer. So you've got, somebody who needs to have this conversation with their father, or perhaps it's their mother. And that makes it even more sensitive, potentially, because it's one thing to have a business conversation with a fellow partner. It's quite another to sit down with your father and say, hey, listen, Dad, when are you going to hand this over to me? Because it's time. It's really time. It's also important to have frank conversations with the client, setting the client's expectations. Hey, we're going to begin a process that's going to transition the relationship partner role initially into a shared role, but ultimately into one where there's a transition over to this younger lawyer here. And not all law firms are willing to have that conversation with the client. Again, there's this, well, maybe they won't notice, or maybe it'll just organically happen, or maybe we can find a way to avoid this conversation altogether. And so, of course, that tends to create a misalignment between the client's expectations and the firm's expectations, and can make the client relationship very vulnerable to a competitor. Another reason succession is a challenge is it requires that the senior partner is fully willing to relinquish the client, and not just one client, but several clients. I mean, this is really a book of business that is being transitioned to one or multiple successors. And they have to be financially motivated to do so. Most law firm compensation models are not set up to benefit the senior lawyer who is transitioning out. There isn't any sort of a effective sunset clause in their comp. It's really just, look, you're going to have to start turning down the spigot, and a lot of lawyers aren't really willing to do that. They're being financially rewarded. Some of them are making more money than they've ever made in their careers, and while it might be short-term or perhaps a little selfish for them to bleed that out as long as they can, and perhaps it's going to cost the firm something, it needs to be a win-win scenario so that, everyone can benefit equally from the succession. So again, we're dealing with some pretty touchy territory here, but all of these conversations need to happen effectively in order for the succession to be effective. Also, this notion of the senior partner being fully willing to relinquish the client. I've worked with a lot of firms on this issue, and it's funny what will happen. Sometimes a senior lawyer will say, all right, I think I'm about 5 years away from retirement, so we should probably begin this process. Okay, great, let's begin the process. But then they procrastinate and they dawdle, and 5 years go by and they say, yeah, you know what, I think I'm about 5 years away from this process. And they're hedging their bets because, of course, they think that they're going to be psychologically or perhaps physically ready to retire in 5 years, but then 5 years come and go and they're still feeling pretty good. And in fact, they just won this case that was a real victory for them, and they are charged with all of this renewed energy, and they can't wait to see what happens next, or they just landed one of the biggest clients that they've ever landed, and now they want to see this through. So it takes a certain degree of psychological readiness to be able to let go, and it's hard to predict exactly when that moment will come. Many times the rhetoric is not in alignment with the follow-through. Another reason succession is a challenge is it requires the senior partner to have an identity beyond the persona of law firm leader. So sometimes when the senior partner really looks in the mirror and thinks about who are they, if they're not going to be the senior partner at this law firm, they're not sure how to answer that question. It can be a pretty terrifying notion. I mean, I walk into my firm every day, perhaps I see my name on the door, that feels pretty good. That name's been up there for a few decades now, and when I walk in, everybody says good morning, and they know who I am, and there's a certain amount of respect and deference that's given to me. That feels pretty good. And when I pick up the phone and I call my clients, many of these people are old friends now, and they rely on me, and I get a lot of personal satisfaction and meaning out of coming to work every day and being in this environment. I'm not sure I ever want to give that up. I mean, who am I if I am not this person? Who am I if I am not a lawyer at this firm doing this work for these clients? And unless the lawyer has done some reflection and is able to answer that question for themselves, unless they've started to plan the next phase of their lives a bit and start to create a dynamic that's going to be intriguing, engaging for them, it might just feel like giving up the most precious thing that they have. Perhaps next to their family, it is the one thing that gives them an identity. So, this is a very personal journey for the lawyer who is doing the phasing out, and not everyone is emotionally ready for it. Again, the rhetoric may be there, but the follow-through may not be. And then finally, succession is a challenge because it requires a transition plan. Most firms don't have a transition plan. You know, they may tiptoe around this topic and they may try to give somebody a hint or nudge them along, or maybe even a frank conversation or two may have occurred, but it usually doesn't have any kind of framework that would ensure that you would get from A to Z. And without some thought put into that, you're going to find that it can get derailed very easily. If there's a bad reaction somewhere along the way, then the rest of the firm says, okay, let's just not deal with this right now. And then you have a delay in the process, perhaps an indefinite one. So hopefully today's program, as we get a little further in, will start to give you a framework for a transition plan. I'll walk you through, at least at a very high level, what a transition plan looks like. And again, you can take that, adjust it to the circumstances at your firm, and have hopefully a more productive transition process for yourself. You may be thinking to yourself, boy, you know, this already sounds pretty hard. Is it really worth it? Well, consider that one of the biggest costs of neglecting to transition the books of business from the senior lawyers and their leadership roles to the next generation is that you lose the next generation. And I've seen this happen so many times where unless that next generation of talent sees a clear path to advancement and leadership, there comes a point where they, even if they develop a modest book of business, they start to feel some autonomy, they start to feel boxed in, and they start to look around and they start taking those calls from the recruiters. They start considering maybe the firm across the street has a better opportunity for me and a higher ceiling for me to be able to expand and make some of the most productive years of my career benefit myself and not just benefit the senior partners here who won't let me stretch my wings. Many times they splinter off, they go solo, they start a smaller firm with some of their colleagues, and this can really be crippling to the firm. So, you know, you want to be thinking about the firm as a whole, not just about the senior lawyer and his or her agenda. Also, the next generation needs to believe beyond a shadow of a doubt that their needs are being considered. Otherwise, there's an inherent disrespect in the culture. They need to know that their role in the firm is more than simply to fund the senior lawyer's retirement. If they feel like that's all they're churning all these hours for, and maybe getting a little piece of the pie as a result, ultimately that whole game is going to get pretty old for them. You'll find that only the grinders will tolerate this kind of a subservient model indefinitely, and mostly that's because they don't have any choice. If the recruiters were calling their line, they would also be in this conversation. So in this dialogue with competitors. So this is, you know, you don't want to wake up one morning and realize that a chunk of your firm just disappeared because, you know, the writing was on the wall and you ignored it. So part of what will help this process along is to navigate some of the generational differences. You'll find that collaboration is one of the best ways to do this. Now, I know, you know, you've got your firm retreat and everybody gets liquored up and hopefully they have a good time, or maybe you've got, you know, mixers where you're getting the firm, the lawyers to talk to one another, or maybe if you're in multiple offices, you're trying to, you know, get them to connect more effectively, and this can be somewhat helpful, especially among peers who have similar demographics and they're in the same age cohort. But when you're looking at a generation or even 2 or 3 generations difference, it's highly unlikely that you're going to form friendships that are as meaningful across a 10, 20, 30, 40-year gap. So one of the things that can be very effective here, and at least creating mutual respect and at least creating some sense of congenial rapport, is to have co-presentations, have the senior lawyers and the junior lawyers co-authoring articles, and at the very least pitching clients together. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, oh, you know what, we do all that stuff. You know, our lawyers are presenting together all the time, and you know, they co-author articles from time to time. I mean, sometimes a senior lawyer will reach out to one of the junior lawyers in his or her practice group and say, hey, listen, you know, I want you to do all the heavy lifting here. I'm going to give you a couple of ideas and maybe an outline, and you can author this thing and I'll proof it and then we'll send it out and get it published. Or, you know, maybe the junior article has, or sorry, the junior lawyer has the initiative and goes into the senior lawyer's office and says, hey, really, you know, I'd like to get myself published. Would you mind co-authoring something with me because you have all the expertise, but I'm willing to do the heavy lifting? And the senior lawyer says, sure. And now there's a co-authored article that's going out there. Or maybe it's a joint pitch where the senior lawyers, and again, oftentimes this doesn't happen as often as it should, but the senior lawyers reach out to a junior lawyer and say, hey, I want you to see what it looks like when I'm pitching a client so that you can learn. It's also important that, you know, somebody on the law firm side is younger in the room because the clients tend to be younger, so let's bring you along. Hopefully we'll give you something meaningful to contribute to this pitch meeting, and, you know, we'll have an effective pitch here. But here's the thing. All of those scenarios are reactive to the situation. They have nothing to do with a transition strategy. They have nothing to do with a succession strategy. The two lawyers who are working together on a co-presentation may not be the two lawyers that are going to be in dialogue about transitioning a client from the senior generation to the junior generation. Or the two lawyers who are co-authoring, they just happen to have that idea. It has nothing to do with whether or not the senior lawyer is going to be handing any of his or her clients to the junior lawyer with whom this co-authoring occurred. So, sure, this stuff is going to happen anyway at the firm, but that's not the point. The point is to start pairing lawyers up in the context of a transition and a succession plan with these kinds of assignments so that they can work together, they can build that trust that may not already exist, they can build that relationship so that the senior lawyer starts to feel close enough and trusting enough of that junior lawyer to say, hey, you know what, we've co-presented a few things, we've co-authored a few things, I've been pushing work down to you for several years now, I really trust your work product. You've developed a relationship with some of these clients through the process of working together, and now I'm ready. Now I feel good about giving you this client, because if we go through this process, I know the client's needs will be met, I know you're going to understand the issues, and frankly, I know you well enough that you're going to come to me and loop me in as necessary so that the client will always have what they need. That's the point here, is that these top three bullets are going to need to be aligned strategically with the succession if they're going to play a part in that process. Also, structured mentorship programs, again, these are going to happen anyway at your firm, right? You're going to have somebody who's the practice group chair, and they're going to mentor somebody in that practice group because they just want that lawyer to develop better skills, or maybe they're going to work together on a case, and of course, through that process, the junior lawyer will pick up more experience and pick up some relationships. But again, that's just being responsive to the situation. If you're thinking of this looking 5 or 10 or 15 years down the road for your firm, you may want to consider putting some structure around these mentorship programs, because here's what I see happen a lot with mentorships. Sometimes the pairings fizzle out because the chemistry wasn't there, because it was based on a particular matter. And once that matter is resolved, the mentorship stops. Or sometimes the firm says, all right, you senior lawyer are going to be paired up with this junior lawyer, and you guys should meet on a regular basis because this person is your official mentor. And they both say, great, sounds good. And they have a lunch, maybe 2 lunches, but they both get busy, and then they don't do anything beyond that. Maybe the junior lawyer says, gosh, all I do is I sit here and listen to war stories and it's getting old. Or maybe the senior lawyer says, you know, the junior lawyer wants to talk about things that are not really all that relevant to me, or they're not asking the right questions, or they seem bored when I tell them some of my best war stories. And so the thing fizzles out and you have no mentorship anymore. So you've got to put some structure around this mentorship. It is a program. It is not just an idea. When it's a program, you're having a strategic pairing aligned with some sort of transition plan, ideally. So again, you're thinking 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, not just let's tick the box on mentorship and make sure that the junior partners are paired up with someone senior at the firm. There should be stated objectives from both parties. So this helps to initiate some of the conversation that may lead to an effective succession plan, where the senior lawyer is going to say, well, I guess one of my objectives is that I want to start to groom the next generation of leadership here at the firm, and maybe this mentorship program will allow me to do this in a way that is consistent and focused and organized. The junior lawyer's objectives might be, well, gosh, I want to learn a lot more about cyber law, or I want to learn a lot more about the clients that the firm is working with that the senior lawyer here, who's my mentor, is the relationship partner on, and I want to do better at developing a book of business for myself. This senior lawyer here has a multi-million-dollar book of business. I'd like to learn how I could do that. And so I have stated objectives. By the end of the 1 year of this mentorship, I want to have developed several new referral sources. I want to have developed maybe 2 or 3 clients that I'm talking to who potentially could be my clients down the road. I want to be speaking to 2 or 3 prospective clients, and I'm hoping that this mentorship will give me the kind of guideline that I need in order to make these things happen. Then at the end of 1 year, after you've had regular meetings and you have some sort of status report, the status report is important because you want to crystallize what you're learning from the mentorship. So, you know, every 3 months or every 6 months, both the mentor and the mentee would put together, it doesn't have to be a long document, it could be just 1 page, a few paragraphs. Here's what I'm learning, or here's what I've learned so far. Here's how I'm measuring up to the stated objectives when we started this mentorship 6 months ago. And that all gets sent to some sort of third party. Maybe it's a professional at the firm, it's somebody in the marketing or business development department, maybe it's the managing partner. It doesn't really matter as long as that's someone who can oversee this process. But this is a very different kind of mentorship than the mentorship that typically goes on just as an organic process at the firm. This is mentorship with purpose. This is mentorship thinking downstream strategically for the benefit of the firm, not just for the benefit of that particular client, that particular matter, or maybe that particular associate for the next few months that they happen to be working on that case. So this starts to get us into an effective succession plan. Hopefully there's been some mentorship going on with some structure, with some strategy as I just described. But even in lieu of that, at the very least, you want to have some sort of institutionalized succession plan. Lindsay and I were talking before we began the program about how oftentimes it happens that a firm may even successfully transition a senior lawyer into retirement, and everybody's happy and everybody feels like the process was navigated effectively. But then 5 years later, the next partner is ready for transition. And there wasn't any kind of institutionalized process. They just sort of improvised their way through the first one and kind of got lucky. And now they don't know where to start for the second one. So to the degree that this can be something that is documented and the expectations are set, not only does that help the firm every time this comes up, but it also, again, sets the expectations for the senior lawyers. Hey, you may want to take a look at our succession plan because there will come a time when we need to have these conversations with you, and you should probably know what those conversations are going to look like. So the very first piece of an effective succession plan is going to be approaching the senior partner with respect and dignity and making sure that his or her concerns are on the table. Because if you don't do that, you're going to find it's really hard to get those meetings with them, and you're going to find that they're just not being very upfront about their issues, and they're not going to want to hand over those clients, and there's going to be a lot of conflict there. And again, some firms just don't have that much of an appetite for conflict, and so they're going to turn their back on the whole thing, and it never happens. So the first conversation to have is to say, listen, we know that as you're getting older and we're looking at what comes next, that at some point a transition or a succession plan is going to be a conversation we have to have. But before we even get close to that, we want to get a sense of your time horizon. And by the way, if you say 5 years, we're not going to hold you to 5 years. You may find that in 5 years you're still not ready. That's okay. We just want to start the conversation with you. We want to start to put a plan in place so that all of your concerns are being addressed, all of your needs are met. We want to understand how you envision this is going to happen. We want to make sure that the appropriate clients are on the table in terms of transitioning them. We're particularly worried about this client, so let's make sure that that's part of the dialogue. We're just planting the seed here. We'll come back to you in a month or two, but we just want you to be aware of what we're thinking and make sure that it's consistent with your expectations and making sure that your needs are met. So that's a very respectful and dignified way to approach the conversation. It's not, okay, listen, you've got in 5 years, you have a mandatory retirement, you have to be out the door. Now, some firms have a mandatory retirement age, although they are in a minority. So if your firm is not one of those firms, then you've got to approach this very gently, because this may be the first time that the senior lawyer has even thought about it or given it any serious thought. It's been pushed to the back of their mind because they've thought to themselves, look, I get up in the morning, I feel healthy, I don't need to talk to anybody about succession, I'm just going to keep doing this for another 20 years. But that may not be the expectation from the rest of the firm. So number two, you start strategically pairing younger lawyers at the firm per client. Perhaps it's for the entire book, but more likely it's going to be more than one successor based on the kinds of clients or the kinds of practices involved. You want to identify demographic pairings between the client and the firm lawyer. Again, we want the similar cohorts on the client side and the law firm side interacting with one another. In some cases, that might mean that it's not the GC who you're going to be focused on, because the GC is roughly the same age as the senior lawyer who is going to think about retiring and transitioning their book of business. So that GC is probably going to be retiring out pretty soon too. We need to go to the deputy GC, or we need to go to somebody who's maybe a rung or two down from that GC within the legal department and start having a conversation with them. Or it's not the CEO that we want to target, it's the CEO's son or daughter who is starting to move up the VP chain and will be inheriting this company in the next 5 to 10 years. Let's pair that person with a mid-range lawyer at our firm, and that way it'll be a really nice fit, and everybody understands where all of this is going. Believe me, the client will appreciate this kind of communication and this kind of forethought, because at the end of the day, the message to the client is, hey, we're taking care of your needs, not just today, but we're thinking 5, 10 years down the road. We don't want you to wake up one morning and realize that the lawyer that you've been sending the work to is starting to phase out and you can't rely on them anymore. Or, you know, all of a sudden they're golfing a lot and taking a lot of European vacations, and you don't have the same level of attention that we know you want. So we're going to ensure that that happens, not just this year or next year, but for the years to come. Also, make sure that the client has seen the capabilities of the younger lawyer's work. This is going to be very important. If they have confidence in the younger lawyer, this whole transition is going to be a lot easier. In fact, it's probably going to go fairly seamlessly and organically. It's just going to happen on its own through process of evolution. But you want to have a transparent conversation regarding the time horizon. Here's what we're thinking in terms of how long it'll take. We may be off by a year or two, but we want to make sure that this is all aligned with what you have in mind, client, because ultimately your needs are going to be, a big part of the prioritization of how we approach all of this. And get the client's input. The client may be comfortable with this. The client may not be comfortable with this. The client may need to see some assurances from you. The client may use this as an excuse to get an AFA from you. I mean, who knows how the client's going to react. But better to have the conversation than to just assume that the client is going to be happy, and suddenly you realize they weren't happy at all, and the way that they expressed their displeasure was by hiring another firm and moving on. You want regular check-ins with the client for feedback. How is this going? I know we said there's a 5-year time horizon. We're only 1 year into this, but we just want to make sure we're still on track. We're doing our part. Are you satisfied with what we're doing? Shall we, continue in this vein? Keep the lines of communication open. Don't set yourself up for bad news through non-communication. And then number 4, manage your progress internally with some sort of formal system. So I'm going to show you a practice pipeline, which some of the firms that we work with use. In full disclosure, this is a product that we've developed, so know that. But if you don't use this, use something else. What this is a simple software platform that scores the lawyers based on the relationships that they are taking care of. So for instance, let's look at Hans. His score is a 40. That's not a great score. We have a couple of lawyers at the firm whose scores are lower than that, but Hans has got a couple of key clients here that we're transitioning over to him. So if we click on Hans, we see, okay, he's got 5 clients that he's working on, and the tiles go red when Hans has been neglectful in implementing this transition plan. So he was going to invite George Wang at Edison to a client event 15 days ago. That's become overdue now. So the senior partner may want to have a conversation with Hans about why this is happening. Maybe Hans is not feeling very comfortable inviting George to this event, or maybe Hans has just gotten busy and so he's forgotten that he has a very important role as the younger lawyer who's going to be inheriting these clients to stay on top of them and make sure that they're getting the attention that they need. With Harper Holdings over here, he was going to check in for feedback on the last matter. It's taken him 15 days to do that. What's the problem here? Maybe Hans isn't ready to have that conversation. Maybe he needs to ask some questions of the senior lawyer about exactly how to navigate that because he's never gotten feedback from a client before post-matter. So again, this gives the senior lawyer some transparency into how the transition is going, and it gives the senior lawyer some confidence that it's going exactly as planned and that the right things are happening. Now, you could obviously do this through a lot of conversations, but typically we find that some of these tend to fall through the cracks because everybody's so busy at the firm. So a simple tool like this can ensure that everybody at the firm is on the same page and that the appropriate level of transparency and communication is occurring. Okay, let's switch gears here while we still have time. We've talked a lot about transition. I touched on buying. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. That really is its own program in terms of lateral hire integration and lateral hire strategy. So we're going to talk a little bit about origination and business development. So if the strategy is to originate as well as transition, or perhaps transition just isn't an option because politically it just isn't going to work at your firm, or maybe these clients just aren't going to transition for whatever reason, so then you really are going to need to ramp up origination and make sure that there's an entrepreneurial mindset among the younger generations at your firm. So there's a couple of things you'll want to think about if this is going to be a priority for you. First of all, assist lawyers in creating business development plans that leverage their individual strengths and skills. One of the reasons that client development, business development is not effective among many of the lawyers at your firms is that they see how the senior rainmakers did it, and they think, I could never do that. That guy is a networking machine, or that woman is just so personable, and I'm just not that way. I don't have that same gift that they have, so I guess I'm not going to do it. But in fact, it requires sitting down and creating perhaps a more inventive way of approaching this, and then documenting that with some sort of plan so that the lawyer can follow through on that plan. So it might involve social media, it might involve authorship, it might involve presentations or panels, it might involve niching the practice in a particular industry. There's a whole bunch of ways to do this and to tailor it to the lawyer. And every lawyer can do something, even if it's just contributing a blog every now and then, or making sure that their LinkedIn profile is up to date. Every lawyer could do something to help the firm excel in business development. They just have to be willing to participate. So don't get into this minders, grinders, and finders mindset where you've suddenly categorized a whole chunk of your firm into a non-productive, at least in terms of business development category. Even if they're just spending 2 minutes a week going on LinkedIn and seeing what their law school alumni are up to and making sure that they're in touch with them, that's something that most lawyers can do and are willing to do. Or even if it's something like, hey, listen, once every 6 months, I'd like you to author a blog for the firm website. Come on, really, a blog that's 4 paragraphs, it takes somebody an hour to do it. You're asking for them for 1 hour of non-billable time every 6 months. Most lawyers are willing to at least do that, if for no other reason than to get you off their back so that they don't have to network. So think about it a little more creatively, because everybody's got to play a part here in this flatter marketplace. Coaching can be very effective, especially for those lawyers who are open to it, who are coachable, who have identified that they really have some enthusiasm for client development. So you want to coach them regularly, ideally once or twice a month, not less than that, because then too much time goes by and the whole coaching process starts to atrophy. But you want to maintain focus and follow through. The coaching can be internal. It can be from the senior lawyers at the firm if they have the time. It can be like a structured mentorship like I shared with you earlier. It can be through some of the professionals at the firm, your marketers and business developers. A lot of them have good coaching skills and you can take this on. You can always outsource this to a firm like ours. There are plenty of consultants and coaches out there who know how to coach lawyers effectively. It really doesn't matter how you do it. You just want to make sure it's being done effectively. We find coaching circles to be the most effective and cost-efficient way to do this. What that means is you gather a group of, say, 10 or 12 lawyers in a room. You have a facilitator. Generally, that shouldn't be a senior lawyer because it creates a little bit of an intimidation for the younger lawyers, and they're less likely to open up and talk about all of their challenges. So this is, again, a good environment to bring in a marketer, a business developer, or maybe an outside consultant to facilitate a coaching circle. But what you have now is you have a number of lawyers in the room. They're all talking about their business development goals, their challenges. They're really being forced to look at their plan at least once a month, because without something like this, they might not. It leverages a little bit of healthy peer pressure and competition, and they spur each other on and encourage each other and give each other ideas. So coaching circles are a great way to minimize the amount of non-billable hours that are being invested in the learning curve, and at the same time make sure that the process is happening effectively. You want to reward business development activity with some sort of tangible or intangible reward. Look, lawyers are generally short-term focused, right? They're dealing with the client's need now, and they're billing in 6-minute increments. They're not thinking 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road, unless they're really being encouraged to. So Business development, as we all know, you meet with somebody for lunch today, they may not engage you for 2 years, or you may not get a referral from them for 8 months. So you want to give the lawyers who are investing some time and energy in business development some sort of positive reinforcement. Maybe that's just an attaboy from the managing partner, an email that goes out because somebody is implementing their plan effectively. Maybe there really is dinner for 2. We're going to give so-and-so dinner for 2 because they've just achieved a certain metric that we know is an indicator that leads to new business, and we want to encourage everyone else to follow suit. But these kinds of things matter, and they continue to encourage the lawyers who are putting in the good work necessary to build a foundation long before they're ever going to see any new clients come into the door for them. Market the wins internally. What that means is promote the wins. Hey, everybody, we want to acknowledge Mary because she just had her first pitch meeting, and she did a really nice job with it. We didn't get the client, but this is exactly the kind of activity we like to see from our rising stars at the firm. Believe me, everyone in that moment will wish they were Mary because the managing partner just sent this lovely email. So, leverage that kind of internal marketing as much as you can. And then finally, be patient. Shifting a mindset and a culture at any firm, law firm, accounting firm, finance firm, any of your clients, they all have cultural issues too. So shifting mindset and culture is a long play. This is not going to happen overnight. You have to stay consistent with it. You have to stay focused on it. Don't give up just because you didn't see a result in 6 months. All right, so a few closing remarks here, and then we'll open it up for any questions. This is the agenda, which I think we got through. I wanted to offer a few resources. I'm going to send a copy of a white paper that we authored a couple of years ago on investing in rainmakers to Lindsay, and Lindsay, you can feel free to distribute this to the group. But this is another material that some of you might find interesting as you look at investing time and resources in getting that next generation of lawyers to start adopting more of a rainmaker mindset and taking those actions that will lead to business development at the firm. A shared practice pipeline with you. Again, if you're more interested in that, feel free to visit practicepipeline.com, and you can always reach out to us for a demo or for more information on it. Also, we have roundtables for managing partners and other leaders at the firm to make sure that you're exchanging notes with one another. And I know ILN is also a good forum for this, but you want to talk to other managing partners or other senior partners who are dealing with this transition issue in particular, because you'll learn from their succession successes and mistakes, and it will save you the trouble of having to reinvent the wheel. Not all of their lessons will apply to your firm, but some of them might, and having that kind of a peer forum can be highly instructive. So if you're interested in a managing partner or marketing partner forum, you can let us know. And Lindsay, tell us a little bit about some of the programs that ILN is offering that could also be helpful in this regard.
Sure. We've done some sessions at our conferences on topics like this. David and I were talking before the program began about a roundtable discussion we had at our conference last November on this very topic, and we're planning on doing some more sessions where we can discuss this among your peers, which is always a great opportunity to pick the brains of people who are going through the very same scenarios that you're all going through. But one of the things that we're very excited about that I was talking to David about before the program also is that we're debuting next week is our new mentorship program. And similar to what David was describing earlier for what firms are implementing within, we're going to be implementing for the ILN, and that's the ability for younger lawyers in our member firms to partner with more senior lawyers at firms around the world. And we are looking at making a very structured program where we set goals and make sure that it's monitored, that we suggest activities, that the partnerships, the pairings are sensible on both sides, and so that it's a worthwhile activity. And one of the other pieces of that will also be a formalization of our previously informal secondment program. So we'll be releasing more information on that over the next few weeks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lindsay, for sharing some of those resources. Any questions from the audience before we wrap this up?
I don't have anything at the moment, but I will say that if anybody has any questions after some discussion, I know that we have some firms who are participating, so people aren't necessarily at their desktops and able to type them in. So if you have any questions later on that you think of and you'd like to email them to me, please feel free to do that, and I can pass those along to David as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions offline regarding any of these topics. We'll look forward to hearing from you. Any closing remarks from you, Lindsay? However you want to navigate from here, but that concludes my prepared remarks for the program.
Great, thank you so much. I'll just remind everybody again that our next webinar with David takes place on June 30th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on From Handshakes to LinkedIn, Personal Branding That Attracts New Business. So we invite everybody to register for that if you haven't already. Many of you have already registered for our full series of webinars, which is great. And David, thanks. This was a lot of great information. I think everybody's going to have a lot to think about. And we look forward to seeing everybody again soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Lindsay. Always a pleasure to be on an ILN program with you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.